Good morning. My name is Lauren Reese, and on behalf of the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program, our Latin America program, and our Brazil Institute, as well as our partners at the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, it's my privilege to welcome you to today's discussion on mobilizing private sector investment for the Amazon. In particular, I want to welcome Congressman Zé Silva. It's a real pleasure to have him here with us today. A couple quick housekeeping notes for those of you in the room. If you have a headset for interpretation, one is English, two is Portuguese. We are going to have a Q&A towards the end of the discussion. So for those of you watching online, please share your questions throughout the discussion using the box below the video that you're watching. It's my pleasure to introduce Wilson Center President Ambassador Mark Green for opening remarks. As a former ambassador to Tanzania, a congressman from Wisconsin, USAID administrator, and current board member of ICCF, Ambassador Green has spent his career tackling some of the biggest challenges and doing so in a way that brings groups that are sometimes at odds together in productive ways that really move the needle. So we're really pleased to have him opening today's event. Ambassador Green.
Thank you, Lauren, for those kind words, and thanks for your leadership here at Wilson and also in the community. Welcome, everyone, to the Wilson Center. We're unique among the world's policy institutions. We were actually established by Congress itself some 5 decades ago with the mission, in their words, of strengthening the fruitful relation between the world of learning and the world of public affairs. And what that really means is that while other institutions deal in data and information, Congress has directed us to go further into scholarship and learning. Our currency is knowledge, our focus is independent analysis, and our purpose is developing options and recommendations that decision makers can believe in. And we are, by charter, fiercely nonpartisan. All of which makes the Wilson Center a perfect place for today's discussion. The Amazon rainforest hosts millions of species and billions of trees which store vast amounts of CO2 and act as a regulator for the region's climate. Some have taken to calling our rainforest the lungs of the planet. Others refer to the Amazon as the world's great carbon sink for what it does and its global impact. It doesn't really matter which imagery you use. I think we all realize that the role of the Amazon is truly irreplaceable in the world today. But we're close to a tipping point. The region has lost almost 15% of its forest cover. Some believe that if more than 20% of the forest cover is lost, it's likely to go through a savannaization process. And quite frankly, that could lead to sweeping extinctions, the disruption of food production, and the release of what some call a carbon bomb with global consequences. To state the obvious, we need a global partnership to protect coming generations from that scenario and its catastrophic implications. The world's largest rainforest is shared by 9 nations that also rely on the forest region and its abundant water resources for the production of electricity, energy, food. These nations have become much more active in recent years in combating deforestation, but with mixed results. It's not complicated. These are developing nations. They have growing needs and a sense of economic urgency. And that means that they cannot succeed on their own. As the former head of USAID and a proud member of the ICCF, I'm a believer in the idea that smart, sustainable development and conservation in the Amazon region can coexist. They have to. As the president of the Wilson Center, I help lead a global thought center that fully embraces the importance of the Amazon and the sharing of technology and resources to take on regional and global climate issues, and quite frankly, prioritizing the protection of biodiversity. I'm proud that we have programs across the center, including our Environmental Change and Security Program, which are making a difference in producing actionable ideas for leaders both in Amazonia and here in Washington, D.C. And I'm proud that our Latin America program and its Brazil Institute are prioritizing this work in their portfolios. In January, they released recommendations through the Brazil-U.S. Dialogue on Sustainability and Climate Change that are designed to help us tackle the issues of deforestation. To complement that effort, the Wilson Center has launched an annual conference, the Brazil-U.S. Climate Dialogue. For today's event, we will all reflect upon the challenges facing the Amazon today and the role of the private sector in supporting government efforts to reduce deforestation. I am honored to be partnering once again with the ICCF and its newly created Caucus Brazil. I am thrilled to be with our distinguished fellow, former President Ivan Duque, former President of Colombia, but far more importantly, a thought leader and champion on climate, new energy ideas, sustainable development, and more. And I'm now going to turn things over to Rayoni, who is an associate professor in environmental management at the Federal University of Minas Gerais and a fellow with the Wilson Center's Brazil Institute. He will provide an overview of the challenges in the Amazon, introduce our other expert panelists, and help to moderate today's discussion. And thank you.
Good morning. It's indeed a pleasure to be here, and especially discussing such important matters. We have a large group of researchers in Brazil at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and I'm really glad that I'm able to make this bridge, as pointed out by Ambassador, between scholarship, not only taking place in the United States, but also in other countries, to inform policy here in the United States, and also at the world stage, which is provided by the Wilson Center. To start off, I would like just to make one remark in relation to the points raised by Ambassador, especially in relation to the tipping point. It's a great concern also of Brazil and of the world, and it's important to highlight that it's not only we need to drastically reduce deforestation, as deforestation is one of the big triggers of the savanization process in Brazil, but also we must stop climate change, because even if we are able to zero deforestation, if we have a significant increase in global temperatures, the Amazon is still going through a savanization process, making even worse and increasing different feedbacks. But in relation specifically to deforestation, how bad is the situation in Brazil? How bad is the situation in the continent, in the basin? As mentioned by Ambassador Green, around 15% has been deforested across the basin. Specifically in Brazil, 17% of the Amazon forest within the country boundaries have been already cleared. However, for each hectare of clear-cut deforestation, which those methodologies pick up with satellite imagery, we have another hectare of degradation by fire and logging, which means the actual damage to the forest is much higher than that. And most worryingly, deforestation has been increasing steadily since 2012, but it has really jumped in the last 4 years under Bolsonaro administration, nearly doubling. And because of that, if we keep with the current speed of deforestation, we might reach 2030 already with 20% of forest loss. And so, dangerously close to what different scientists have been pointing out as what might be a tipping point for the Amazon. Also, it's very important to highlight that we're not only talking about change that impacts the world, but we're also talking about deforestation change that impacts Brazil and Brazilian agriculture, because climate change happens at those two levels, in terms of global warming, but also in terms of circulation of humidity within the continent, and especially within Brazil. We have led a study at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, basically trying to understand the local impacts of deforestation in the reduction of rainfall and also the displacement of rainfall throughout the year. And what we have found is that for every extra dollar earned by the foresters, because deforestation is something that has, of course, an economic benefit for those deforesting, we have $9 lost by the community due to the change in the hydrology. So it's in a situation where a very few win and most lose. And so in that line, who are those deforesters, and why are they doing so, since, it's for the loss of the majority? And I think to start off, it's important to highlight two different social groups and economic drivers of deforestation. We have first the deforestation related to poverty and related to the lack of access, for instance, of technical assistance and proper agricultural practices and technologies. And so, for instance, if we categorize those as deforestation, that might take place with chunks of up to 6 hectares, so 6 football fields, done with the own work of the farmers. We have accounted that this actually only adds up to 3% of the total deforestation taking place in the Amazon. So, of course, deforestation by small farmers is an issue of concern, and we need there to have social policies to deal with that, but that is not the main problem in the Amazon. When you look at the deforestation taking place in bigger chunks, especially at large chunks, so over 25 hectares, which at that point we would need not only the workforce of a single person, but actually a whole enterprise with tractors, with chainsaws, and with specific personnel for that. So a capital investment. 2/3 of the deforestation right now in the Amazon is taking place via those large efforts with large chunks. And not only that, if we consider all the deforestation that has been taking place inside farms in the Brazilian Amazon since 2008, actually only 2% of the farms concentrate 2/3 of the area deforested. So those are the rotten apples. Those are the bad guys who are actually bringing losses, economic losses and environmental losses for everybody. And so what can we do? Is there any hope? Can we actually tackle those different challenges? I believe so. I believe we have a major different possibilities of going forward. First of all, we must undo the damage done by Bolsonaro administration. He has explicitly dismantled law enforcement by changing regulation, by making it harder for farmers to be actually prosecuted, and also by doing mass cancellation of fines, which of course do not contribute to the notion that if you deforest, you are going to be punished. Not only that, he has been systematically replacing high-level and experienced forest rangers who have been working for decades sometimes in the Amazon and are very knowledgeable of the dynamics of crime, to political appointees. Some of them were actually lawyers working on the behalf of the foresters themselves. So you can see there is a lot of conflict of interest in this. And also has been deeply cutting budgets. The current budget that Lula is going to be receiving from Congress actually is the lowest budget since 2014. So we are talking about here a very dire situation, but it is possible to reconstruct. It's possible to revert those changes in legislation with the Amazon Fund, which funds have been frozen since 2019, which is an initiative funded mostly by Norway, but also with the support from Germany. So we have there some resources that are going to play a very important role. Of course, it's going to be crucial to mobilize international support for that, especially at the beginning. And also, it's very, and in this process, I do think, I firmly believe that on the short term, we are going to be able to revert at least the large-scale deforestation by increasing law enforcement. But that's not enough. What is also really crucial is the involvement and a stronger role of the private sector, because you can go on and fine people as much as you want. You can actually issue fines, embargoes, etc. But if they're still able to sell their produce to international traders, to slaughterhouses, then of course the punishment is not going to be very effective. And we know that companies have been spearheading different initiatives, and indeed we have here 2 very good examples of that. But one of the key limitations they have is in terms of data. Because right now, farmers have learned how to avoid controls and how to wash their produce linked to deforestation by simulating, for instance, that soy or that meat has been produced in a farm without deforestation, whereas in fact it was produced somewhere else with deforestation. So to increasing transparency in developing systems able to increase traceability of those products is really crucial. And that, in addition to working closer to farmers, I think is also very important to highlight that many farmers farmers that might have deforested illegally in the past, they must be provided a way out of that. We must find ways to reinclude those farmers, to regularize any eventual issues they have had, because of course it's not only about exclusion but also about inclusion and sustainable agriculture on the long term. And that's why I believe very strongly that we can reach before 2030 net zero deforestation, and with our integrated work that not only deals with law enforcement as one part of that, but also with payment for ecosystem services, with technical support, with environmental regularization, with land regularization in a way which is integrated and which is actually building a better future, not only for Brazil, but for the rest of the world. I will now switch to Portuguese, if you don't mind, as I'm going to greet Congressman Zé Silva. Deputado, né, Zé Silva, né, um prazer tê-lo aqui conosco.
Representative Zé Silva, it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
O deputado Zé Silva é autor, né, de diferentes projetos de lei.
Representative Zé Silva is the author of different law projects.
Que buscam fomentar exatamente a agropecuária sustentável em todo o Brasil.
Promote sustainable agriculture in all Brazil.
Através da assistência rural e transparência das cadeias produtivas.
Rural aid and transparency in the productive chains.
Deputado, gostaria então de chamá-lo, né, à tribuna para poder falar um pouco mais sobre as suas iniciativas. Muito obrigado.
The stage so we can talk about your initiatives. Thank you.
Bom dia a todas e todos.
Good morning, everyone.
Com certeza, para mim, como engenheiro agrônomo e parlamentar, uma alegria muito grande e também o peso da responsabilidade de poder contribuir nessa ação global em defesa da Amazônia, em defesa do desafio da humanidade, que é produzir alimentos e, ao mesmo tempo, preservar o meio ambiente. Nós sabemos que, assim como as riquezas minerais, as riquezas petrolíferas e também a Amazônia são patrimônios de toda a humanidade e que, se tratado de forma solidária e global com soberania, com certeza nós teremos os desafios, especialmente do combate à fome e às desigualdades, serem superados. Eu inicio como agrônomo no parlamento, cuidando especificamente de agricultura, com foco na agricultura familiar, campesina, e também como presidente da comissão de mineração em busca da mineração sustentável, já que o Brasil tem passado nos últimos tempos por desafios extremamente fundamentais para lições, não só para o Brasil, mas também para as outras nações. Nós sabemos da nossa potencialidade de um país continente em que 2/3 do nosso território encontra-se 21% em reservas. Desses 2/3, 21% de reservas nas propriedades privadas. Então, isso mostra que o produtor rural brasileiro ele cumpre um papel fundamental em termos de preservação. 13% são unidades de conservação, 14% desses 2/3 são terras indígenas e 19% são terras devolutas, que é preciso fazer a regularização fundiária. 21% são pastagens nativas e pastagens plantadas, e 9% do nosso território que é ocupado com agricultura. Nos últimos 40 anos, através da ciência, da agronomia, nós conseguimos aumentar 250% da produtividade, enquanto aumentamos a área em apenas 70%. Isso mostra que é o desafio que o mundo espera do nosso país, de nos próximos anos produzir 40% da quantidade suplementar de alimentos que o mundo precisa. Nós temos essa responsabilidade, conhecemos essas nossas potencialidades, mas ao mesmo tempo nós sabemos que essas potencialidades, elas não nos eximiram da responsabilidade e também de entrarmos num ciclo que eu chamo de vicioso. Esse ciclo vicioso, nós precisamos de ajuda, e essa ajuda para sair de um ciclo vicioso para um ciclo virtuoso. Esse ciclo vicioso que foi aqui destacado pelo professor Rajão, das queimadas, desmatamento e mineração ilegais, isso traz drásticas consequências não só para o Brasil, mas também para o mundo inteiro. E a proposta que eu trago e tem debatido no parlamento brasileiro, no sentido do ciclo virtuoso, ela parte de um tripé da regularização fundiária. O segundo pilar desse tripé é regularização ambiental e vem respaldado com um tripé estruturante que é da assistência técnica rural, especialmente quando se avalia a questão da posse da terra. 98% desses proprietários citados aqui pelo professor, eles são de pequeno porte e também essa grande maioria, eles ocuparam a Amazônia, vindo das regiões central do Brasil, do sul e do sudeste, no sentido de que teriam políticas públicas que pudessem permitir uma agricultura sustentável,
that would have sustainable agriculture respecting biodiversity in our biome. This didn't happen. Some of these families are in the 5th generation now, and this terrain regularization is required. This 13%, and this that was logged, and this 19% of people there, as Professor Jarjon mentioned, they did so because there was a lack of presence of the state. And if there is no deed for the land, there is a challenge. Where is the responsibility? If they do not have the document to show ownership of the land, they cannot do the process for legislation. Brazil evolved its legislation and now has an environmental law, which is the forest code. It's like a constitution for the environment. And after the regularization, we're going to start with the technical assistance, which is going to bring productive systems that are sustainable. We can mention a few of them, like direct planting and the integration of cattle and agriculture and forest systems. But this would also only be possible if we have technical assistance of great quality that will separate what's working correctly and those who are working illegally. If you're doing it illegally, then the police is going to handle this. It's the command and control of our legislation. So now to cover the legislation that Professor Rini mentioned, we are moving to a project of law, a bill that I presented in the National Congress to show that we don't have to remove any more native trees from the forest for Brazil to be able to conquer and fulfill its role in the production of food in the world. This is what we call our green heritage with culture, and that's why technical assistance is essential, because it's going to guarantee the environmental production and sustainable systems, as I mentioned, agricultural and forest systems. And the producer will have access to our current economy, which is the green economy. And the second project is called the Agroverde project, in the commercialization of mainly animal products that we can trace to know if that producer, if that cattle raiser is producing in a property with illegal deforesting or not. And that is essential information to introduce in the bill for market, which is the registration that we use to put in practice our environmental law, our environmental constitution, which is our forest code. And the other one is the animal transit guide, which shows the health of the animals. And this is going to bring more responsibility to the biome. And we also have the forest concessions, not only in the perspective of a concession of public lands, but with creativity to transform our forest into economy, into our green cards or green titles. And the legislation is, or the bill from another parliament representative, Carlos, who's working with us, would bring flexibility to the management of contracts and agreements, allowing for fish culture, agriculture, and forest management. And it's also important, and this is another proposal, that this 98% of farmers, of the percentage that we mentioned that were in the deforesting group, to receive social technical assistance. So with the technical services, with the regularization of the land with science and information services and with financial aid, of course, we will be able to access the economy of the future, which is bioeconomy. Some of these projects were already approved in the House of Representatives by established and some actions have been started to show that the Brazilian government is fulfilling its role, but more investment is needed, particularly in structuring the agencies of the state that are having actions in the forest, which is IBAMA, the Environmental Institute, IBIO, which takes care of our parks and forest, INCAR, which is the national agency that manages our great national heritage and our territory. So with those bills that we're working on in the National Congress, we want to support this journey, the journey from the vicious cycle to a virtuous cycle, and more certainly with the work conducted by the Wilson Center, this Center of Thought and Intelligence, in partnership with other nations, we seek to achieve this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman, for your comments. I would now like to invite our guests and speakers from Brazil, who, luckily now with technology, it's able to have such hybrid events. So it's really, really great to have you here. Specifically, I would like to invite Renata Nogueira, who is the South American sustainability lead of Cargill, which is one of the biggest and most active companies in the world in different supply chains and different commodities. And in particularly, I would like to ask from you, and as we know, and as given the comments of Congressman Zé Silva and also my earlier comments, the sourcing of deforestation-free soy, especially in the Amazon, it is a major challenge. Renata, could you tell us a little bit more about how Cargill has been dealing with those challenges in the region and also other initiatives aiming to foster sustainable agriculture? Thank you very much.
Bom dia a todos, muito obrigada pelo convite.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to share some of these challenges that are not only from Cargill, but also
Renata,
from a whole
could you just pause
country?
for a minute? Just sorting out the audio here. I think you were actually not on mute because I can see the green, kind
Sim.
of border around you, and I believe also Paulo, you can hear me and hear Renata as well, right? Yes. So it's on our side for the sake of the public here. Just a sec. But can you actually hear on? Okay. So the information I have is that you can hear on directly on the headset. So please, Renata, go ahead and thank you.
Bom, eu espero que todos estejam me ouvindo
Well,
agora.
I hope you can all hear me now. As I mentioned, it's a huge pleasure to be here. I thank you for the invitation to share a little bit of the challenges that we face, which are not only challenges for Cargill, but also for all the companies that are present in Brazil and other countries in other countries that touch the Amazon region. Now, I want to share with you that Cargill is present in 70 countries. We are 155,000 employees that are working for the company to reach its goal of nurturing the world in a safe and responsible way. We always connect producers to market and customers to ingredients and people to the food that they need. We have 155 years of experience with new technologies and ideas to be a trusted partner for the food and ingredient sector, and also financial partners. We work together with them to build a more sustainable future for the agriculture, not only in South America or Brazil, but globally. Our concern with the Amazon doesn't start today. In 2006, Cargill signed the soy agreement, which, as I believe most of you know, is a sectorial agreement that guarantees not commercializing soy from deforested areas. And with the review of the forest code in Brazil, which happened about 6 years before the date was adjusted to 2008. Now, it's important to mention that this commitment goes beyond the Brazilian legislation, because even when detecting the authorized conversion by the agencies, the companies that signed this agreement cannot, or this ban cannot commercialize these grains. Other important information is that the producers in Amazon have to preserve 60 to 80% of their property with native plants, according to the forest code. So the production, whatever it is, can only happen in 20 to 50% of their properties. And by being in compliance with this commitment, the signing companies develop procedures and tools that were internal to exclude non-conforming products in this soy ban. And since the start of the initiative, all the signing companies would go through third-party audits that are monitored by NGOs like Greenpeace, WWF, and Mafora. And it's important to highlight that there is a soy group, working group, that has the participation of different NGOs that monitor the fulfilling of this commitment, but also has frequent meetings. In the past, the Brazilian government was part of this group, and we expect the new government to go back to this activity because it didn't happen in the last few years, and the role of the government is essential for the success of this soy ban. Imaflora is a Brazilian NGO that launched Soy Online, Soja na Linha, which is a transparency portal for the soy value chain that connects producers, industries, marketers, and producers and customers. It's also a source of information for the civil society to follow up the productive chain. In this website, you may find a lot of information about the ban and also the Green Protocol for the state of Pará, which is another commitment that was signed by companies to guarantee the legality of soy that is produced in the state of Pará. And how is this dynamic happening in the soy production in the Amazon biome? Since 2007, 2008, soy is expanding at a rate of about 500,000 hectares a year. And this would clearly show us that this ban did not stop the expansion of soy in the Amazon biome, but it directed the production in areas that were deforested before signing the agreement. So we may conclude that this ban actually incentivized the production of deforestation-free soy, and this is very positive. Another very important piece of information to share with you is that from 2008 to 2020, with the almost 8 million hectares that were deforested in Amazon, about 3 million have happened in 109 municipalities, where the 147,000 hectares were identified to be non-compliant with the soy ban. So production of soy that was conducted in deforested areas after 2008. So this area would correspond to 2.5% of the total soy production area in the Amazon in the 2021 plantations. So we can conclude that only 2.25% of the total area of soy production in the Amazon has a connection with the forest conversion. From another perspective, most of the soy production in the Amazon happens without deforesting, which is very positive. So 98%. And we focus on the 120 municipalities that are in disagreement with the soy ban. And Cargill excluded from its chain not only the soy that doesn't comply with this ban, but also corn that is not complying after 2008. And also in terms of palm, we are tracing our supply of palm in Brazil up to the source, and we monitor this with satellite imaging systems. And we have also been developing a program in the micro-region that is called Tomé in the northern part of Pará, with 520 producers of palm that seeks to have an environment that is resilient in terms of balance between agricultural production and forestry and the quality of life of these producers, besides the figures showing the good protection and compliance with the ban. and the signing companies and their actions, we know that deforesting in the Amazon is a reality. And if the government does not perform the correct control and the punishment for criminals, we know that this problem is not going to be solved. There is the risk of indirect purchases also not complying with the ban. That's why the signing companies are working and engaging more companies in this commitment. Just to give you an idea, in 2020, the signing companies represented 78% of the purchase, the power of purchase and the grains in the Amazon after a year of a lot of dialogue and engaging other companies that were not part of the soy ban. We have 92%. Next year, we will continue the work of dialogue and engaging other companies that are still not part of this soy ban. And in the end of the process, we intend not to purchase from any company that accepts to be a part of this soy ban. This will guarantee more production of deforesting-free soy, but for the deforesting in Amazon to actually stop, it is necessary for the government at the state, municipal, and federal level to guarantee the command and control and to apply our forest code so that everyone in all the biomes, particularly in the Amazon, to comply with the law. As it was mentioned at the start of the event, it is necessary to conduct tracing for a good monitoring of the chains. They need information, the companies need information regarding illegal deforesting, and also the information of the rural environmental registry. And also in the market, the customers also need to show appetite to pay for a product as Brazilian soy that is produced with low carbon practices. And in areas where there is a preservation of the native plants in the permanent preservation areas as we can see them in the code. I will close my talk here and I'm available for your questions and comments. Thank you.
Renata, thank you very much for your comments. It's indeed really impressive the work you have all been doing. And next, I would like to invite Paulo Dallari from Natura Co. If you don't know Natura, I mean, all Brazilians do know Natura, and increasingly others will. It's a leading company, a cosmetic company, which has been really spearheading new ways of producing cosmetics based on the biodiversity, very rich biodiversity we had in Brazil, especially in the Amazon. And so in that direction, I would like to ask you, because we know that in order to ensure environmental conservation, we also need to find ways to promote the forest economy so that standing trees actually are worth more than cutting down trees. And in order to do that, we need to actually develop supply chains on non-timber forest products. Paulo, could you please tell us more on the experience of Natura in those regards, and what's your long-term vision in relation to that? Thank you very much.
Super obrigado.
Very well. I deeply thank you. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Wilson Center and ICCF for this invitation. I want to thank the professor for this kind introduction. I'm extremely happy to hear these references, and I want to congratulate you for the initiative to conduct this event in such an important moment for the Amazon, and also for the acknowledgement that the panel is doing of the importance of the private sector in this debate, which is something that Natura has always highlighted throughout its history. Now, Natura Group is now the biggest group in cosmetics in Latin America, the fourth largest in the world. We are in over 100 countries, and we have a relationship that is very special with the Amazon. Natura acts in the Amazon region since 20 years ago, and to dialogue in the topic of the panel here, the impact of the private sector in the preservation and conservation of the forest based on developing sustainable business is something that is more than proven for Natura. Now, responding to Professor Roni's question, Natura is currently working with over 40 communities that represent about 8,000 families in 4 countries of the Amazon region: Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. And these communities represent about 80 supply chains with almost 30 native species of the Amazon, different species. Just to mention a few, castanha, morunguru, ocuba, andiroba, patawa are some of our main supply chains. I probably caused issues for the translator, but we can later give you the names in English as an example. So they are all native species of the Amazon biodiversity that are included in our products. They are produced by traditional communities and communities whose livelihood happens in these communities and these areas. And by sustainably producing these materials, they bring a preservation of about 2 million hectares of forest. Now, our goal in the commitment to life, which is the sustainability vision of Natura for 2030, is to expand that from 2 million to 3 million hectares that are preserved as a consequence of this sustainable production of material by the communities. Now, we know that, well, those are interesting figures, and it is a case story that is always mentioned as a success case in terms of production and preserving the Amazon diversity. But we also know that those are small initiatives when we consider how great the Amazon is and how great the challenge that we're already facing and have in front of us is. So conversations like the one we are holding today become even more important. Professor Honi already presented you with some data, but I would like to remind you of the great figures that we now have that would picture the size of the challenge that we have in the Amazon. Only in 2022, in figures from October, the Amazon reached 9,000 square kilometers that were deforested according to the INPE, which is the worst mark in the historic series since they started measuring this. So we have figures of deforesting that are just terrible. And now we are close to the COP27, the Conference of Parties, and 49% of the CO2 emissions in Brazil were stemming from deforesting, and agricultural 25%, energy 18%, and waste industry 4%. So if we turned off 100% of the Brazilian production, even in that situation, 50% of the total CO2 would be emitted from Brazil, which is a huge percentage. And without without tackling deforesting, Brazil won't be able to solve or tackle our climate change issues. So how can we address that scenario? Of course, that we don't have one true answer, but we can share our experience of 25 years as a company in the Amazon and what we suggest as possibilities. And I'm going to split this into 3 elements. The first element is fighting crime and illegality. So security and peace of mind are essential for legitimate businesses to be developed and for the communities with which we work to be organized in a productive fashion, and for more private actors to be interested in building sustainable supply chains in the region. Nowadays, most deforesting is illegal, is criminal, and this should be approached in some way. This approach includes the non-amnesty for already performed deforesting, which is a topic that from time to time would come up in the National Congress. And Representative Zé is a witness that this is a narrative that comes back over and over. So it's essential to have structured fighting of illegal activities, because illegal deforesting, which is the most part nowadays, is not going to be solved otherwise. But just fighting crime is not going to solve, because that's not building the future. They may stop a trend, but the construction of our future brings me to the second element in our experience, which is local income. the preservation of the environment is directly linked to generating local income in the Amazon. When we talk about our 40 communities in the Amazon region, we are referring to communities that would produce and bring income based on the sustainable production of bioassets in the region itself. When we think about the processes and the mechanisms and the structures such as the carbon market and payment for environmental services and even market standards that are linked to the environment that are being debated by the European Union and the US, these actions are only going to have a positive structuring impact for the Amazon if they are thought as direct mechanisms to transfer and generate local income, to structure mechanisms that will just make the assets leave the forest and go to urban centers will not solve the deforesting challenge, because that's not going to bring alternatives of local development and local income. And I can give you a very specific example. Natura has been engaged in the discussion of the carbon market in Brazil. And one of the proposals that we have been sponsoring together with other allies is a mechanism to share profit that are obtained from reselling carbon credits with the original producers, so traditional communities, indigenous communities, and quilombolas that are producing carbon credits. And if those credits are then resold by the buyers, a percentage of that value should go back to those traditional communities as a way to incentivize and to share the outcome and the profit of this credit. This is one of the mechanisms. This is probably not the only one, or even the best of them, but it's a very specific proposal for the income to be fixed into the Amazon region and the forest, so that the local population can live from preserving nature and sustainable production in large scale. Because the question that we always get is, how do we build more Naturas? How do we scale up the way Natura is working? And this is one of the suggestions. This would be one of the possibilities for scaling, to bring mechanisms that allow to fix the income locally. Now, a third element that has to be addressed is investment. And I'm talking about investment in terms of infrastructure in the Amazon and research that is linked to the local biodiversity and the development of the bioeconomy of the region. And I want to share an alert with you here. For many years, we would talk about the development of the Amazon, and we would think about building roads, for instance. That model of investment in infrastructure, for instance, has to be very specific to the Amazon region and has to take into consideration the local ecosystem and the natural advantages that the Amazon has. So it's not good to just cut the forest with roads or take away the natural advantages of the region, which was the model that was established 50 years ago and brought some results, but not outcomes at the level of the investment that was made. And I'm going to mention something that I hear from a lot of colleagues and at different fora for the environment and even agricultural fora that we attend. It is cheaper and it has more public support to start cattle raising production or agricultural production connected to commodities in the Amazon than developing supply chains that are sustainable based on the biodiversity. And this stems from the traditional cattle raising and agricultural development that Brazil did a very long time ago, and that is being fruitful. It's getting good outcome. We have a very significant production and a lot of companies in the agricultural and cattle raising sectors. But in the Amazon, considering the preservation, we need for that same option that was done for cattle raising to be developed for bioeconomy in local production. The Amazon has to be able to develop and produce products and commodities that are natural to the region and that are interesting and have a market our country and outside of our country. And this is going to happen only with very heavy investment in technology and innovation and infrastructure. It has to be part of a plan and a public policy that is structured to make the Amazon region a region that is developed based on its own products, its own wealth, and its own biodiversity. Now, just in closing, I think that any proposal for sustainable development in the region, and this is something that is also very natural and very clear for Natura, it's only going to move forward with a partnership between the public sector and the private sector. And many of the presentations that we heard already considered the need for this dialogue, which needs to happen permanently. And we do believe very objectively in the outcomes that this could bring in terms of development for the forest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for very interesting remarks and examples. It's indeed remarkable the expertise you have been bringing and the work you have been doing in the last decades. Next, I would like to invite Susan Liles, Executive Vice President of the ICCF Group, which is an organization that, in addition to sponsoring this event, has been working with parliaments all over the world trying to bring consensus, because as we know, it's hard enough to actually move forward in relation to environmental aims, and especially in contexts where consensus must be built across the aisle. And so it would be really great to hear your thoughts of your experience, especially in Africa, in other countries, and how those lessons could be also brought to Brazil. Thank you very much, Susan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ambassador Green and the Wilson Center. Thank you, Rayoni, and fellow panelists. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak today about the importance of engaging legislators on conservation and environmental issues, and how ICCF's model is catalyzing these dialogues through multi-party caucuses, and then the opportunity for these cross-party dialogues to play out in the Brazil Congress. So our model started here in Washington, D.C. with the International Conservation Caucus, which has grown into one of the largest bipartisan caucuses in the United States Congress. It's in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And the foundation was established to support the leadership of the caucus by educating members about key issues through linking them with subject matter experts from NGO and private sectors. Then in 2012, the ICCF group was established to help replicate this model in parliaments and congresses around the world. The first two were in Colombia and Kenya, but over the last decade, we've expanded to more than 20 countries across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Now, while each country is different, the global model is to support parliamentarians in establishing their own forums or caucuses in which legislators from rival political parties and a variety of portfolio committees can convene to discuss conservation challenges and to reach consensus. ICCF helps create the space for dialogue, but it's really important to note that it's the members themselves that decide the issues, the priorities that they want to focus on, and how they will address these. The model has yielded much legislative success historically, as it provides the opportunity for legislators in the caucus to engage with scientific experts, with government agencies, multilateral organizations, NGOs implementing conservation projects, and very important, as we've heard here today, leaders in industry. And this engagement happens on a regular basis, which brings diverse perspectives, and it emphasizes the value of public-private partnerships. This is done through a variety of methods: briefings in the capital cities, roundtables, educational field visits to conservation and agricultural sites, regional conferences, large events like ICCF's annual International Conservation Gala, where we bring caucus leadership from all of the caucuses around the world, and also regional parliamentary exchanges, which is very key. So to give a few examples of how the caucuses have played key roles in introducing and passing legislation, I want to start first with the U.S., with the authorization of the Congo Basin Forest Partnership, which supports the implementation of a network of national parks and protected areas throughout Central Africa. Then there's the Tropical Forest and Coral Reefs Conservation Act, which enabled debt for nature swaps, allowing countries to redirect debt obligations to instead support local organizations working to conserve tropical forests. In Africa, there have been numerous examples. We're now supporting parliamentary conservation caucuses in 11 countries, soon to be 12. Many of these countries have created amendments to strengthen wildlife and forest policy. They've worked to support the securing of public-private management agreements. The passage of the penal code in both Gabon and Angola was fairly historic in the past few years as well. In Latin America, much of the focus has been on the expansion of protected areas, regulation of single-use plastics, and promoting sustainable forestry. And then in many areas, regional cooperation to address transboundary issues such as wildlife and protected area management, forest and wildlife crime, IUU fishing, and illegal mining, as well as policy harmonization across borders has been a key initiative and is ongoing. So while dialogue in the Brazilian Congress, and I'm not an expert, has led to multi-party legislation such as the Forest Code, which was discussed, and payment for ecosystem services, I believe the law passed in January of 2021. There hasn't yet been a robust institutional forum to make that a regular occurrence until recently. And now ICCF in Brazil is helping to make this cross-party engagement a regular process by bringing together parliamentarians from multiple parties who have expressed an interest in becoming more engaged in the environmental issues that are important for the country and for their constituents. Supported by our local affiliate, Instituto Caucus Brazil, the Brazil Caucus was formed officially in May by 15 members of the lower house and one Senator, Nelson Trad. The caucus is going to hold an event in Brasilia later this month to welcome the new and also re-elected members of Congress who will be in the caucus. Also, at Senator Trad's request, ICCF Brazil is organizing 3 meetings over the next year among parliamentarians from Amazon countries in parallel with the senators convening of members of the Amazon Parliament. The first event is going to be in Colombia next week. The next 2 will be in Peru and Brazil over the next year. One of the panels next week will include a roundtable on Amazon legislation, which will be held in the Putumayo province of the Colombian Amazon, and it will be followed by visits to private enterprises which are operating sustainably in the region. So in closing, I just want to reiterate that there is most definitely a willingness in Brazil to engage across party lines in the Congress. This is going to become increasingly important given the polarized partisan boundaries resulting from the recent elections. And Rayoni, maybe this is a good time to turn it back to you to question you and the other panelists on thoughts of how best to engage these legislators in the new Congress. So thank you.
So please, Susan, don't go away. And also would like to invite to sit here with us Congressman Zé Silva, and also, of course, the speakers that have been online. We have now a space for a round of questions and discussion, so it would be really glad to hear your thoughts.
Congratulations.
Okay, so just to start off, as the audience gets warmed up, And Congressman Zé Silva, indeed has been now, I would like for you to tell us more about, in your view, what are going to be the main challenges of the new government, the recently elected government, in relation to the Amazon, and how Congress, which is actually the most conservative Congress ever elected in Brazil, can be an ally in this process.
Bem, nós sabemos do
Well, we know
diagnóstico
the diagnosis
ao perfil do
in
Congresso.
terms mainly of the profile of this Congress. But at the same time, there are some bills and proposals like the ones I mentioned. Some were enacted at the low chamber and are going to be approved in the Senate. And even with the difficulties of the budget law for the first year for president, some agencies of the state like INCRA and CMEBio, IBAMA and ATEC, which is a national agency that takes care of technical assistance, could be effectively restored. And it's not so much depending on the National Congress. The land regulation, for instance, can be done about 92% of it with the current legislation, with only resources and political will. So I think there is a good perspective in terms of this political will happening and this political decision being made, and resources will become the main challenge in my perspective. We have a very good, hopeful future ahead of us.
Initiatives, and you actually mentioned a few, such as the Debt for Nature initiative, which was a big success, especially a few years back, and also we need to step up climate finance worldwide. And in that context, the United States has a big role to play and a big potential to grow in that direction. Given the current challenges, thinking about the caucus in the US, how do you see might be the way forward in order to mobilize bipartisan support for international cooperation on climate finance?
So maybe to speak a little bit more broadly about challenges that other caucuses have faced in order to work at a bipartisan, across the aisle way, which we know is really the only way, I think, to get real legislative successes. I thought maybe I could highlight some of the challenges that we've heard from other caucus leadership and how they have addressed those challenges. And climate is a good one to talk about, I think. Frankly, I think that sometimes it's difficult for members of Congresses or parliaments to get behind issues because they might not really be in their political self-interest or seen as interest to their constituency. And what we have heard from members of various caucuses is that it's sometimes a question of framing the issue differently, or maybe even being in a position, and this is where stakeholder engagement comes in, where they can see issues from different sides. And I think one of the most effective ways this model is working is because it allows members of Congress to hear from private sector, from NGOs, to have a really diverse way of looking at all sides of issues. And sometimes what happens is that there are benefits that come out of that type of engagement, such as maybe it's a national security interest that an issue is seen as a priority, where others might say it's intrinsically right, maybe it being a national security or economic competitive issue where it actually will benefit the constituents with jobs or development, because development and we know development and conservation really can go hand in hand and should go hand in hand. I think maybe another challenge or another way of addressing this, we've heard from several caucuses in Africa where Ministers are MPs. MPs can become ministers. Ministers introduce legislation, but often when legislation is introduced by, for instance, a ruling party, it's seen as a party issue, not for its intrinsic value. And because it's seen as a party issue, other parties may not get behind it. But the caucus creates, again, this really robust vehicle where members from all sides and all constituents have an opportunity, again, to engage with stakeholders and learn a lot more about the value. And it's, again, we've seen legislation being supported and really debated with successful outcomes because of this wide, diverse caucus model. So I think, last I will say, there does have to be a willingness to work across the aisle, and we've seen in some countries a slow start. South Africa, for several years, really didn't want the caucus to be multi-party. They wanted it to be a single party. And we haven't seen that be successful, but just this year, the caucus was established in South Africa as a very, very multi-party vehicle. And they've been very aggressive in getting behind issues. Circular economy is one, and recently, with our support, ICCF support, the leadership and other members of the caucus went to Kenya to learn about single-use plastic legislation and how to address circular economy issues. So we've seen great success over the years, and we are very confident that with the leadership that the Brazilian Congress has already shown, that the caucus will be very, very successful.
Thank you very much. And actually, I just would like to hear a quick remark from Paulo and Renata, speaking from Brazil. And now under the new government we have, from a private sector perspective, what do you think are going to be the main contributions? What might actually facilitate and increase the impact of the private sector in terms of providing a basis for sustainable development?
Would you like me to start, Paulo? Well, I think that with the new government, the expectation of the private sector would be that illegal activities are in fact fought and tackled, and this is relevant for any company that is present in Brazil. And we are certain that this is possible. It is possible to do this because this government already showed that they know how to do this. So we are hopeful in terms of this being done again. And we hope that transparency can be provided to the illegal actions, the rural environmental registry. As I mentioned in my talk, this is an extremely important aspect for companies to be able to trace the product they purchased. And I think that companies also play an essential role of speaking to the government to scale the actions that are proposed, particularly those related to the technical assistance of rural producers. I'm not only referring to small rural producers. We have seen this happening in Brazil. There are very significant movements of soy producers that are middle to large sized in the sense of applying regenerative practices that can be better structured and based on science and disseminated. And I believe that the private sector will play an essential role in this dissemination, and in partnership with the government, we have great opportunity of having great success in this regard. Paulo? I'm going to build on Renata's talk to say that I completely agree with the beautiful perspective that she brought us. And I would like to add one more element with the conversations that we had in people that are closer to the future government, to the government-elect. And what was presented in the government program throughout the campaign, although they are always very brief in their content, we are very hopeful on the vision of sustainability as part of the country's development, no longer as a separate and standalone policy that is exclusive to preservation, but more as part of the strategy of the position of the country and the positioning of the country in the global stage, considering that Brazil has very significant economic advantages in the agricultural perspective and the industrial perspective based on its energy matrix that is cleaner and the biodiversity that is available in the different biomes that we hold. And if this is matched with public policies that seek Brazil's development and the expansion of the sustainable ways of production and new industries, bioeconomy, and green economy, Brazil can move forward on this. And this is something that we started seeing during the campaign and in the statements after the elections as something that was frequently found in the positioning and the speeches of the campaign members and people who are close to them in the different stages. And we have the expectation of seeing them being a part of the transition and the government itself. So this is the great change that we have seen so far.
Yes, please go ahead, Congressman.
Bem, complementando e também concordando com o que disse a Renata
Just
e o Paulo.
to complement this and agreeing with what Paulo and Renata mentioned, our party contributed to the proposition of the plan for agriculture and agricultural and environmental actions. And as Paulo mentioned, the preservation is part not only of the policies for environmental preservation, but the macroeconomy of Brazil in sustainable development. So, Paulo, I do think this perspective is essential and it brings us a very good expectation. And even with a conservative Congress, we could motivate how attractive this is for the congressman.
And so, and we're going to have this final round of questions. If there is any final specific questions from the public, I think we can also add that there's the gentleman there with the grade. So first online, and then we can have this round together.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. And we will come to the audience in just a minute. When you pass the mic, just make sure you state your name and title and affiliation if you don't mind. From online, we have a question from Logan Shire, which I think has been partially addressed, but maybe we have a final point about it from the panel. How likely do you think we are to see real change in policy and actions with deforestation with the recently switched administration? And this is one actually that I added. Sorry, I took the prerogative there. What are some of the steps that policymakers in the private sector can take to ensure the longevity of policies? What needs to be in place so that progress isn't subject to shifting political winds? The second question is an interesting one. The focus on the Amazon is very important to mitigate climate change through decreasing deforestation. But what about the largest urban centers in countries that are part of the Amazon? How do cities connect to this conversation, and what can policymakers and the private sector do to address those issues? Thank you.
Thank you. And we may add the question from the gentleman.
Thank you. I'm Judah Marsden. I work with the Amazon Conservation Team here in Washington. I was curious, research by the UN Scientific Panel of the Amazon has shown that soy deforestation affects moisture transport across South America, and including the La Plata Basin. This also relates to the other questions in the Zoom. The impact of deforestation in the Amazon goes beyond the affecting Amazonian countries. It has certain floods in southern Brazil, such as in 2014, and also affecting agriculture in the La Plata Basin. So I was curious, I guess this question is specific to Renata and Cargill, how the conservation of critical ecosystems and the effects already of soy deforestation, how could the private sector be involved in mending those impacts? I relate this specifically to the Chiquitania ecosystem, which is a dry tropical forest south of the Amazon that covers Bolivia and Brazil, and also other critical ecosystems specific to moisture transport across South America.
Thank you very much. So I think we can start from our online speakers, if they could take the questions together.
Bom, eu posso começar. Eu acho
Well, I
que
could start. Sorry, we lost sound.
Renata, could you just stop for a minute and restart again?
eu estava no mudo.
Okay, now.
I was muted, sorry. Go ahead.
Com relação à primeira pergunta, eu acho que o grande
Well,
desafio que
regarding the first question, I think that the main challenge that Brazil will have to fight deforesting will be related to budgeting.
a gente já vê na mídia,
As we can already see in the media, we're going to face great challenges to have resources to actually apply the actions that need to be applied regarding command and control, technical assistance, and others. And we need to invest so that those actions to fight deforesting are long-lasting, and we need to have strong institutions, and we need to apply the forest code. Those are two essential elements so that in the next government,
não tenha nossas políticas de desmatamento novamente
our
utilizadas.
deforesting policies are not once again made frail. So we have been very strongly engaged rural producers, engaging rural producers so that the negative impacts that were already brought to forests and other significant biomes in our biodiversity can be remediated. And Cargill started a new program to plant trees, aiming to restore 100,000 hectares in the next 5 years. And we have a technical group that is supporting us so that the restored areas are high priority. And this is a program that we're starting in Brazil, but the idea is to move beyond Brazil to other areas of high environmental value and biodiversity. And so we've been working together with our value chain to identify the areas that need to be restored, and we are funding this restoration, and they are priority areas such as rivers and mountains, and in areas where we can establish ecological corridors and contribute to the protection of biodiversity. All our actions are along the lines of the partnership with rural producers and what Cargill can do with rural producers so that the negative impacts are mitigated and we can, in fact, end deforestation and the healing of native plants and promote prosperity in rural producers, particularly in South America, where we know that many regions with high preservation value are overlapping areas of high poverty.
Thank you.
Vou seguir então a Renata.
We'll speak after Renata then, and I believe that both questions speak to each other somehow. It is evident that the impact of the Amazon goes way beyond the Amazon. It has an impact and already had an impact in the production in Brazil and the supply of water for great urban centers. We had a series of disasters at the start of the year that were related to the excess of rainfall in some regions of northeast Brazil. And so this is going to reinforce my prior point regarding the issue of sustainability being more structural for the country and not a standalone topic to fight deforestation in the Amazon, like a topic by itself. Fighting deforestation in the Amazon is part of something larger and the bigger picture. And I believe that's where we see the challenge that has to be considered and that the new government should seek to tackle, which is precisely how we can include sustainability in the very diverse policies that we have to discuss, for instance, tax reforms without discussing the impact that it may have in sustainability, or to discuss revising environmental licensing or agricultural policies, or hunger, fighting hunger, for instance, without discussing sustainability, without discussing preservation, environmental preservation, makes all those policies very limited because this is something that is being discussed around the world. So the challenge for the government is to bring that debate and in a cross-sectional fashion. And there are resources, of course, that are limited, as Renata herself mentioned. So there is the budget challenge, but there is another element that is important to highlight. And I think that the electoral map of Brazil already shows us how sustainability could be dealt with not as a partisan topic, but as a topic for the development of our country. And I think that we are concerned about how this is going to be tackled, and the National Congress has the focal point and the focal role of dealing with this as an overarching topic for the development of the country, not as a partial topic from one party. This is a topic that is cross-sectional to a huge diversity of issues, and this is the challenge for the next government and the next legislature.
Thank you, Congressman.
Bem, evidentemente que as duas perguntas elas são sinérgicas.
Well,
E nós
clearly,
sabemos que nós
both
temos
questions are synergistic, and we know that we have 85% of the Brazilian population in urban centers. We recently enacted the regulatory framework that establishes stages and rules to treat urban water bodies, which is a great problem of public health and for the Brazilian economy. Also, when we talk about preserving and restoring our mountain ranges, this is a biome that represents a great share of the biome in Brazil. And speaking of our experience in this regard, we know that the greatest challenge is going to be financial. Because in the initial diagnosis of the budget for our next year, we saw that we're going to have scarce resources. That's why initiatives like the Amazon Fund and I don't want to replace the Amazon Fund, but we need aid for other biomes, like for instance, for the mountain ranges in Brazil for water, the Cerrado and the Amazon basin and rivers, most of them start in this area. Now, regarding the parliament, any country in the world would have a parliament that is a clear reflection of the thought of their population. So I think that the challenge will be huge in terms of raising awareness about the environmental issue not being standalone, but also part of the preservation of the economy. And that's why the caucuses and the discussion with other countries, particularly about the Amazon basin, are essential. And we're already in discussions to have this network involving the countries and the continents, so that those issues are not tackled by only one country, because the problems of one country become the challenges of all the nations in the world.
Former President of the Republic of Colombia. Thank you very much. It really honors us your presence here. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a great honor for me to be here, and I want to express my gratitude for this amazing group of distinguished panelists that have made so many reflections about the Amazon and the future of the Amazon. And especially, I want to say that this comes at a very important moment because we're just a few days from seeing the COP27 begin in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And we're a few weeks away from the discussion that will take place in Montreal when we see the COP15 on biodiversity. The reason why this is such a great discussion is because protecting the Amazon is not just a matter of conservation. And it's just not a matter of protecting a sensible area in the world. It's because if we do not protect the Amazon, the damages derived from climate change are going to be irreversible. And I mention this because when we evaluate the impact that the Amazon has on the world climate and ecosystem balance, it's so evident based on three very important indicators. The Amazon is the most biodiverse area in the planet. Second, the Amazon River discharges in 1 hour the same amount of fresh water that is consumed in a year by more than 7,000 million people. And at the same time, the Amazon, in terms of size, it's twice the size of the EU and is larger than the United States without Alaska. But we're losing, in terms of the Amazonic biome, a very significant amount of land year over year. And I think the best way to describe it is that in the last 40 years, we have lost the size equivalent of Germany and France combined. And this has to stop. Now, the question is, how and why? On the why, not only it's because it helps regulate the world biodiverse ecosystem, but basically because since 1970, we have lost more than 60% of the wildlife resources around the globe. We have seen that 80% of the deforestation that has occurred in the last 4 decades has taken place in tropical forest. And something that is very important to highlight is that even if the world decided today to put an end to all the energy that is run by fossil fuels, will still be lagging in order to accomplish the goals that we have set for 2030 and 2050, primarily because of negative land use and deforestation. If deforestation were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And if we look at the percentage, is the second largest source of CO2 emissions around the world. So protecting the Amazon is not an option. We have to act, and we have to act boldly and rapidly. And I want to emphasize 10 items that have been mentioned today and that are part of the reflections that the Woodrow Wilson Center has been doing, also hand in hand with other environmental agencies around the world, but also with very important institutions that do research and that also are preaching so that countries at the highest level take this to heart. And I want to also congratulate the work of ICCF by trying to bring these debates before Parliament. When I was president of Colombia, I was able to discuss with our Congress the approval of the Climate Action Bill at the end of 2021, which was approved by a unanimous decision of all parties in the House and in the Senate. And it demonstrated that when it comes to conservation, we are all one single team. So the first item that I want to highlight is conservation, putting at first the continuity of the Leticia Pact that was signed in 2019 by all the Amazonic countries. And this implies the sharing of information. This implies the capacity to mobilize resources to work with peasants and with indigenous communities. But this also has to do with helping all the countries in the Amazon to embrace the principles of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature, which determine that we have to get more than 30% of our territories declared protected area before 2030 or by 2030. And I should say that Colombia is, in fact, a reference model because we were able to leave Colombia on August the 7th with 34% of our territory declared a protected area, combining maritime area and on-land territory. So we cannot wait until 2030. We have to do this now, and I hope that all the Amazonic countries follow that path. Now, the second thing that is very important is how we face environmental crimes. Because most of the environmental crimes in the Amazonic countries do not have imprisonment sentences. And yes, we have done a lot to fight against crimes against humanity, but I think we have to do much more on crimes against nature. And I'm just going to make some reflections there. The main causes of deforestation in the Amazon are illegal crops. People don't regularly talk about the environmental damage of coca crop, but in order to produce 1 hectare of coca, 3 hectares of tropical jungle are destroyed. Besides that, the amount of chemicals that are diverted in the Amazon forest that is aimed to the producing of coca is creating such an amazing damage that is not really highlighted by the whole world, or the international community, nor the media. But it's interesting also to say that in order to produce 1 kilo of coca, something close to 20 gallons of gasoline have been used. That is almost pumping 3 SUVs with fossil fuels. And it's interesting as well that cement is also one of the materials that is mostly used to the production of cocaine. That is also one of the materials around the world that is very intensive in the demand of traditional energy. So it's not only a drug with a high environmental impact, but it's also a drug that destructs great part of the tropical jungle. Illegal mining, that's another debate where we have to get, and I think we surely need to call also world corporations to help tackle, identify, and be able to seize or destroy the yellow machinery that illegally has been put on the Amazon territory and that is used to destroy the tropical forest. And certainly AI technologies and georeferential technologies can help us identify which and from where that yellow machinery came from. Another element is regarding livestock, illegal livestock production, and illegal wood production. So we can decentivize the use of wood as we did it with a decree in Colombia promoting the Amazon fruits and creating aggregated value of Amazon fruits with buyers from other places like Copasu, Camu Camu, Acai, Sachainchi, among other Amazonic fruits or Amazonic products that can not only have a sustainable way of living for indigenous communities and families, but can also effectively disincentivize the use of illegal wood. So those are elements that we should have there. Now, the third element is about the way in which we can connect the protection of the Amazon with green financing, carbon credits, and something that is now in discussion, which is the biodiversity credits. We definitely need to be able to certify, to verify, and audit projects that are aimed to recover land that has been lost, but also to seal in a technical way areas that shall be protected and that we can measure the tons of CO2 that are being captured that can also be sold through carbon credits to allow companies around the world to offset their own emissions. And this can be a sustainable way of providing resources to indigenous communities. We can also mention, and this is number 4, market-driven, nature-based solutions. If we involve in a sustainable way the participation of the private sector to generate resources, to work with the communities, and put the recovery of Amazonic land that has been lost, this can also be a major driver of transformation. And obviously, I connect this with the invitation to all the Amazonic countries, not only to embrace the possibility of issuing green bonds, but at the same time to have green taxonomies that have this glossary of actions, including the protection of the Amazonic territory, that shall be presented to the world or the international financial markets. The number 6 is the natural conservation contracts, so that we can massively work with the local communities, create long-term contracts with them, so that they can become forest protectors, Amazonic land protectors, and at the same time generate a sustainable way of living. I also want to mention on 7th and 8th the biodiversity concept. And I connect this also with the green businesses in the Amazon. So those two elements can allow that the way the cities are planned in the Amazon, because people don't regularly know that 47 million people live in the Amazon biome. And they live in cities, but we want those cities to become leaders in the way they use electric vehicles, in the way they manage waste, in the way they manage water resources, so that they don't generate stress on the Amazonic richness. And we should also be able to provide capital resources that can either be early stage, can be also for startups, but basically to turn the Amazonic cities in a land of green businesses in Latin America. I have to mention as a 9th point, the involvement of indigenous communities. We want indigenous communities to be winners in all this process. And this is something that can only be done through education, through engagement, and through the mobilization of resources, but also creating with them cooperatives of natural-based solutions and market-driven solutions. And last but not least, since we see what's going to happen in Sharm el-Sheikh and what's going to happen also in Montreal, I think the sad news is that we cannot expect today that there's going to be a major worldwide agreement in terms of the reduction of emissions beyond what has been achieved so far. But I truly believe that bringing more countries to the High Ambition Coalition is going to be one of the best news that's going to come out of Sharm el-Sheikh, and is going to send a strong message towards Montreal. And saying that, I think the most important indicators that we can use is certainly to put zero deforestation as the target for 2030. If we continue implementing the Leticia Pact, if we bring more enthusiasm and more policy determination in Brazil, not only at the national level, but at the local level, for sure, we will be able to put that goal and try to reach it. And certainly, doing this implies that the only way that we can get to carbon neutrality by 2050 and reduce worldwide emissions by 51%, as has been discussed previously last year in the United Kingdom, we can say that land use and fighting deforestation is the only way to bring to zero the more than 12.5 gigatons of greenhouse gases that have been emitted by land deterioration. So protecting the Amazon and putting all this framework together is not only a priority, but is the way in which, hand in hand with reducing emissions in the aviation sector and doing the energy transition, can certainly bring us to the largest reduction since we are having all these multilateral discussions more than 30 years ago towards 2030 and be able to reach effectively carbon neutrality by 2050. So I want to express that I am very happy to hear all these very important concepts from the Brazilian authorities and from the Brazilian members of the NGO system and the academia and science, because I think this is going to be an opportunity that started with the Leticia Pact. And I really want to highlight this because beyond the common wisdom, Brazil signed the Leticia Pact in 2019. And it was signed by the current administration, was signed by Evo Morales. It was not ideological. Governments from the left, from the right, from the center, we all signed that agreement. And I think if we accelerate the Leticia Pact, considering these 10 points that I have mentioned today, based on what has been discussed today, we are truly going to make a tremendous impact in favor of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you.